Furious Junker says, is there any part of your worldview where you realize you ought to change after going through a formative experience? And all right, let me just phrase that one more time. Is there any part of your worldview where you realized you ought to change your worldview after going through a formative experience? In fact, I would say that a formative experience, one that affects us at a deep level, by definition is formative because it alters your perspective. My wife is a marriage and family therapist, and one of her special research tracks has been trauma. Reasons for trauma, mitigations for trauma, etc. But at one point in the study of trauma, she came across this amazing definition, which was a traumatic experience is one in which the veil is pulled aside about how little you matter, how little we matter, how little the universe cares about us. We live in this pleasant fiction where we say goodbye to our partners every morning and we see them every evening and we see our families a few times a year and stuff like that. And we know intellectually that all that could go in a heartbeat. But there's a difference between knowing that and having it happen to you. And when it happens to you, I think one of the parts of grief is realizing that, you know, the universe does not care about your puny soul. And that is difficult. I want to say also, okay, so part of me was going to talk about Tree Cannon and a Cannonball, both episodes in which the explosions got away from us on Mythbusters, and luckily no one was hurt in either of those experiences, but each one changed every safety protocol we had ever thought of moving forward. But those seem like less interesting stories to tell right now. And you can find other versions of me talking about Tree Cannon and losing the Cannonball. But whenever we talk about experiences changing us, I think of Ian McEwan. Now that might seem strange. He's a British author, Booker Prize winner, I believe, wrote a whole bunch of amazing books. I've read many of them back in the day. The one that really affected me the most was Enduring Love. Specifically, I think Enduring Love has one of the great opening chapters I have ever come across. And I first came across it as an excerpt in the New Yorker before the book came out. They just printed the first chapter. I have done a bit of editing on the first 4 or 5 paragraphs of Enduring Love, and it's to the end of putting into your brain what sits in my brain, because I think it's quite useful. In it, McEwan comes up with a metaphor for exactly this, the way events change us. Okay, so this is just Ian McEwan, the opening of Enduring Love. And I've removed a couple of paragraphs that aren't necessary for the rhetorical flourish here. It says, the beginning of the book is 1. The beginning is simple to mark. That's the beginning. The beginning is simple to mark. We were in sunlight under a turkey oak, partly protected from a strong, gusty wind. I was kneeling on the grass with a corkscrew in my hand, and my wife was passing me the bottle of wine. This was the moment. This was the pinprick on the time map. I was stretching out my hand, and as the cool neck and the black foil touched my palm, we heard a man's shout. We turned to look across the field and saw the danger. Next thing, I was running toward it. The transformation was absolute. I don't recall dropping the corkscrew or getting to my feet or making a decision or hearing the caution Clarissa called after me. What idiocy to be racing into this story in its labyrinths, sprinting away from our happiness among the fresh spring grasses by the oak. There was the shout again, and a child's cry, enfeebled by the wind that roared in the tall trees among the hedgerows. I ran faster, and there, suddenly, from different points around the field, 4 other men were converging on the scene, running like me. What were we running toward? I don't think any of us would ever know fully, but superficially, the answer was a balloon. Not the nominal space that encloses a cartoon character's speech or thought, or by analogy, the kind that's driven by mere hot air. It was an enormous balloon filled with helium, that elemental gas formed from hydrogen in the nuclear furnace of the stars, first step along the way in the generation of multiplicity and variety of matter in the universe, including ourselves and all our thoughts. We were running toward a catastrophe, which itself was a kind of furnace in whose heat identities and fates would buckle into new shapes. At the base of the balloon was a basket in which there was a boy, and by the basket, clinging to a rope, was a man in need of help. I don't know what you need to get started with a book, but that's like one of the greatest openers I've ever read. And that metaphor that the catastrophe was a kind of furnace in whose heat identities and fates would buckle into new shapes, that has never left me in thinking through formative experiences. And the last thing I want to say about formative experiences takes one more story. In 1987, I had art directed a couple of friends' student films, and my friend Gabby called me up and said she's working on a student film about a guy who gets abused by his ATM. And I'm going to shorten this story because it's a 20-minute banger of badness, because I mess up everything in the story. I take the job to art direct a bank vestibule for her friend's student film. And over the next 3 weeks, I spend all of their money and I don't get them a set. I screwed up so royally. And the number of ways I screwed up are so numerous, but I go to the set to pick up my toolbox after my ignominious failure, and my toolbox isn't there. What's there is a note that says, meet us at this location. And I'm assuming that I'm going to go to this location to get beat up. That's how mad the crew is at me. And I'm so mad at myself. I'm so ashamed of what I've done that part of me wants that catharsis. And I call my dad from that room, the room where my toolbox wasn't and the note from the crew was. And I was openly weeping, and I said, I've messed up so badly. I don't know what to do. I've lost a friend. And he let me go through all this, and he said, look, there's nothing you can do to make better what you've done. You cannot make it better. You have to live with that. He said, what you can do now is look at what happened and how you brought it about, and resolve to try not to do that again. And I went and met with that. That stunk with me. That stuck with me. That hit me right. It at least gave me some place of like, I can't change what happened, but I can at least change going forward. I went to meet with that friend to go over the budget. We walked over everything over 2 hours. And then she said to me, you could not have done anything more clearly to make it clear that you are not my friend. It's one of the worst things I've ever heard from someone. And I don't disagree with her in the way that I betrayed and failed her and that team. And a few months later, I turned down a job that was an incredible opportunity for me because I could tell I was about to move into a similar situation. And even though that opportunity didn't happen, and there is a reality in which I could have taken that job and had a completely different kind of life. But I very specifically remembered the failure on Gabby's film, and I thought, this is where I change. This is how that change occurs. And the final thing I'll tell you about formative experiences changing you is something I read while reading Baba Ram Dass, a wonderful, wonderful writer, wonderful meditation teacher. He said that only total despair precedes a change in consciousness. Only total despair precedes a change in consciousness. And I have to say, in my experience, try as I might to induce changes in consciousness in other methods, total despair has been the only way in which they stick, man. That is absolutely true. I have one more thing to say about this, about Ram Dass. Here we go. We're going to go. I know we'll take some questions from the live stream, but this other question from Sirius Cyberntx. One of my favorite moments on Tested is when you veer into the philosophical and or meditative realm, and at the risk of being too much of a downer, I have a question I'd love to hear your perspective on. Sirius Cyberntx says, I am recently getting back into making after the loss of my 10-year-old son last year. He used to be my little shadow anytime I was working on something, and I have felt his absence anytime I step into the garage. Man, I hear that. For Halloween, my oldest son asked me to make him a Hollow Knight costume. And so I jumped back in and used several new to me techniques, including 3D printing and Bondo. Congratulations on those. Which I found to be a cathartic process. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations on getting back into making after suffering the loss of someone closely associated with your making? Man, my heart goes so out to you, I cannot even conceive. Just reading those words is intense. I cannot imagine what you are going through inside your head and in your life. But, you know, the thing I have to say is just is that you're doing it right. The catharsis at the bench is a safe catharsis. And Ram Dass, I think in that same book, is talking about having gone to India, met his guru, spent a year there, comes back home to his rich Connecticut parents dressed in robes. And he's come home because his mother has died. And his father's like a Republican and wearing a suit, picks up his hippie son wearing robes. This is like the late 60s. His dad gets up to the airport and Ram Dass walks out. His dad's like, get in the car, like as fast as possible. I don't want anyone to see you. His dad's so like, you know, bereft with grief and can't deal with this son that arrives from India to deal with his wife's death. Anyway, as Ram Dass and his dad are talking, it turns out that his mom died in the middle of canning jams for the winter or something, however you can jams. But it was undone. And Ram Dass suggested to his dad that they go downstairs and they finish what she started. And over the course of that afternoon, he sees his dad experience the grace of a small break from grief while doing something with your hands. And that is a grace. And you are experiencing that grace in the shop. And my heart goes out to you. And I'm glad you have a shop to walk into to experience that grace. I know we started off really, really heavy, but it's a heavy time and I feel like we got to talk at this level, okay? zanehodgenracing says, as a fellow ADHD edition person, I wonder if you ever experienced prolonged ADHD paralysis. ADHD paralysis, hold on. Is that a term of art? ADHD paralysis. Phenomenon experienced with someone to research a state of extreme overwhelm and difficulty in initiating or completing tasks. Oh my God, totally I have that. I find that I can easily get into a rut and it's difficult to escape it. Yeah, I can be both amazing in an emergency and absolute shite in an emergency. Both modalities can happen. When I am in that state here in the shop and I'm noticing that I'm having difficulty initiating or completing tasks, I go home. Or I go into the tested offices or onto my couch over here and I sit and veg for an hour. Yeah, I take the time. And a lot of that ability to take the time is informed by my meditation practice. I've been meditating for 3+ decades, poorly, abysmally. My meditation practice is terrible. It still gives me untold amazing benefits. I practice a kind of meditation called Vipassana meditation. If you're interested in a scientific approach to meditation, there is one because it has survived many double-blind tests in terms of treating all sorts of amazing things. And you can look up MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's a fantastic modality for anybody. And I'm here to tell you, great for ADHD folks. Mindfulness-based stress reduction. There are classes you can take in it, 6-week classes that walk you through some stuff. Invaluable. Any metric they grab from the beginning of an MBSR course to its end shows improvement, man. And John Kabat-Zinn has been running the MBSR clinic in Boston for decades. I don't think he still runs it, but at any rate, he's like a giant in this. Meditation. Even when you do it poorly, like I do, it brings amazing benefits into your life. Yeah, well, so this shows up. That Clyde's like watching this and saying, "How do you maintain gratitude? You seem good at it." Dude, you know, I won the lottery. I won the lottery. Born to my parents when that happened. Born in the 60s, raised in the 70s, high school in the 80s, San Francisco in the 90s, found my career in the 2000s. It's been a lovely journey, and it hasn't been without its horrendous life-changing difficulties. And still, you know, if you ask me to go and make all the same choices again, I really believe I would. Also, you know, I pay a lot of attention to the suffering that goes on, and it's not easy. There's a lot of suffering going on. There's always a lot of suffering going on. There's a lot going on right now, really in particular. And, you know, I check in with my friends these days, and the texts are all quite similar. How are you? And I'm like, my family's good. My kids are great. The world feels like it's falling apart, but, you know, I'm doing what I can. Meditation. Thank you for watching. I wanted to talk to you about Tested membership. The Tested members are a key community that we find really, really remarkable. That's very separate from Tested and from YouTube. The Tested members, they buy each other memberships during our live streams. So if you're wondering whether to become a member, watch one of our live streams and someone may just give you one. It is hard to overestimate how much the Tested members actually make possible on this channel. They give us a lot of wiggle room. They give us a huge amount of feedback.
That's a member right now.
Thank you so much for enjoying your membership. Description for everything you need to know. And for all the members out there, thank you, thank you, thank you.